Our speaker this evening is Marita Bujold. Marita is a beloved member of our community, a beautiful artist, strong activist, and founder of the Just Food and Water Leadership Initiative. She created the Just Food and Water Initiative to invite communities to imagine and together create an award-worthy and inclusive food economy designed from source to table, to connect as neighbors to a common purpose that is caring for one another and the home we share. Marita authored the Headwaters Community Food and Water Bill, which MN 350 Action is promoting as a strategic climate solution. With Marita tonight is her colleague, Sarah Riedel, who will facilitate this evening's questions after the presentation. Sarah served as the volunteer team lead for MN 350's Food Systems team, and now is employed as communication manager for MN 350 and MN 350 Action. Before we begin, there are a few more Zoom instructions. Your mic will be muted, and please continue to keep it that way. We ask that you send your questions to Sarah via chat. It's called Questions for Marita. Marita will answer as many as time allows. And if you have any technical difficulties, please call John Hartman at 612-205-0538. Now, here is Marita Bujold. Welcome, Marita, and please begin your remarks.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to be with you. Well, tonight's presentation is going to be a video that is recorded. So with some help from tech, we'll be able to present that first, and that will be followed by time for questions and answers. So without further ado, let's begin the presentation. Welcome to a presentation of Neighbors Together Toward a Sustainable Future. In this presentation, we will look at the defining features of the current food economy and outline the leadership we need to create a path forward with the Headwaters Community Food and Water Bill. We will begin by looking at the story of water and follow with a comparison of the two food economies operating in the world today. The conclusions drawn from that comparison will help us understand why we need to create the new food economy outlined in the Headwaters Bill. From source to table, this regenerative food web is designed to meet the demands of food, water, and climate. Finally, we will look at the ways in which we can take action to support the Headwaters Bill. In the series Our Planet, David Attenborough makes this statement: "Never has it been more important to understand the natural world and how we can help it together." With this statement, he defines our role and the urgency of the moment. As communities make plans to live sustainably and face the climate crisis, a common thread emerges: the direct link between the health of ecosystems and the health of our communities, and the crucial need to create the just food economy we need to nurture and maintain that connection. This is the economy created by the Headwaters Community Food and Water Bill. MN 350 Action is actively promoting this bill as a strategic climate solution. To understand why we need this bold systemic solution, we need to understand our current circumstances. Let's begin with our story of water. Minnesota is the headwaters for 3 major watersheds. We are positioned to take a leadership role in caring for water. Yet when we look at our story of water, it is clear that we need to set a new course. Thousands of miles of rivers and millions of acres of lakes and soil serve as repositories for chemicals. All of them are byproducts of industrial agriculture. Wherever the industry operates, water is contaminated, including here in Minnesota at the headwaters of the Mississippi River. Downstream, that story continues as the river flows into the Gulf of Mexico, a body of water identified as one of the world's largest dead zones, a direct result of industrial agriculture. How did a river system so full of promise and life become a repository for chemicals? Is she still a river when she can no longer support life? How did this happen? The condition of water is one byproduct of a publicly subsidized industrial food economy which is created and maintained by the Farm Bill. We must be clear. The Farm Bill, combined with trade agreements, fuels the success of the industrial food chain, an industry which is, by design and practice, unsustainable. By design, the industry depends on practices that contaminate, extract, and destroy ecosystems, contribute to greenhouse gases, create dependency, and food and water scarcity. All of this is legal, and we all pay for it. The chain maintains control of our food system while also proclaiming this false narrative. We need them to feed the world. The good news is that we know this claim is false, and we know what we need to do. The proven leaders for food and water security and climate adaptation are Indigenous communities living in challenging conditions around the world. Today, our food and water security depend on the foods, skills, local ecological knowledge, and methods of preservation generated over thousands of years by Indigenous communities. That winning combination allowed them to thrive while caring for the ecosystems that sustained their communities. They are the proven leaders in climate adaptation and food security. Working in partnership with nature remains the key to climate resilience. Healthy ecosystems are crucial for generating the food we need and sequestering carbon. As our communities make plans to live sustainably and meet the demands of climate, we need to follow the leaders and create a food economy designed to partner effectively with nature. The Headwaters Community Food and Water Bill creates an economy that builds on the proven leadership of Indigenous communities and sets us on a course for success. The condition of water reveals the perils of our dependence on the industrial food chain. But the story does not end with water. When we look at the defining features of the industry, we are left in no doubt that by design and practice, this system is unsustainable. The only conclusion we can draw is that we need to create an economy designed to meet our needs. In the next part of the presentation, we will review the two food economies operating in the world today. Comparing them will help us understand why we need to marshal our public investments to create the robust, locally adapted food economy defined by the Headwaters Bill. These are the two food systems operating in the world today: the industrial food chain and the peasant food web. There are 2 billion small-scale producers in the food web. Many are indigenous peoples. They include farmers, fisherfolk, and pastoralists. They live in every conceivable climate in rural and urban settings. The industrial food chain is a created economy. The Farm Bill is written by the industry leaders for the industry. They are making the decisions about our food and the world's food. Conversely, small-scale food systems, the communities that are the members of the peasant food web, are not invited to that table. With this in mind, let's compare these systems. First of all, who is using the world's agricultural resources? The publicly funded industrial food chain feeds 30% of the world's people, but uses more than 75% of the land in the process, destroys 75 billion tons of topsoil annually, and cuts down 7.5 million hectares of forest, uses 90% of the fossil fuel used for agriculture, and 80% of the world's fresh water to irrigate crops, generates between 44 and 55% of greenhouse gas emissions, at a staggering combined cost of $12.37 trillion for food production, damage to ecosystems, and health impacts. Who is producing the world's food? Most people are surprised to learn that the web of small-scale producers feeds 70% of the world's people, using less than 25% of agricultural land and only 10% of agricultural use of fossil fuel, 20% of fresh water, while nurturing 9 to 100 times the biodiversity used by the chain across plants, livestock, fish, and forests. Members of the food web plant, save, and share 2 million varieties of locally adapted seeds from 7,000 plant species. And with these practices, they capture carbon by maintaining the health of the soil and forests and savannas. One of the stark differences between the chain and the web is their use of water. The chain uses 80% of the world's fresh water each year to feed only 30% of the world's people. Here are some of the impacts. The chain extracts water to irrigate crops, for livestock operations, and for product processing. As a consequence, 1/3 of the world's aquifers are distressed. 2/3 of aquifers are being depleted to a point where they cannot be replenished. 27% of water use is for industrial livestock operations alone. Globalization of the food system means the food we eat uses water from someone else's country. In the US alone, 40 trillion liters of water are wasted annually producing food that is never eaten. Coca-Cola's water footprint alone, direct and indirect, is sufficient to meet the needs of 2 billion people annually. 4 billion tons of food are produced in the chain each year. What happens to those products? 50% of the chain's crop calories are used as livestock feed for animals. Only 12% of those calories are converted into food for people. 9% of the crop calories are turned into biofuels. 15% is lost in transportation, processing, and storage. 8% is wasted in households. 76% of the chain's calories are wasted before making it to the plate. Only 24% is eaten by people. 50% is discarded on the long journey from farms to traders, food processors, and retailers and restaurants. What are some of the defining features of the chain's operations? Every year, 350 million barrels of oil and 40 trillion tons of water are wasted producing food that is never eaten. Expansion of industrial agriculture accounts for 70 to 90% of global deforestation. 71% of deforestation in Latin America is from industrial livestock operations. Destruction of natural pollinators and habitats with toxic fertilizers and pesticides. Exposure to toxic chemicals kills 220,000 people each year. Processed foods containing the surplus corn, wheat, and soy make up 75% of the chain's sales. For every $1 paid to the chain, the public incurs $2 in cost for managing the chain's destruction. The chain's total cost equals 5 times the world's annual military expenditure. And 30% of the plastic found in the oceans is generated by the chain. 2 million tons each year. In the list of features that define the chain's operations, confinement of animals for meat production presents a clear and present danger to our health. Animal confinement produces vast quantities of concentrated liquid manure that pollutes air, water, and soil. And to promote their growth, confined animals are injected with antibiotics. This use of antibiotics pollutes water and soils and is fueling antibiotic resistance at a cost of $55 billion each year. 60% of all human infectious diseases are transmitted through domesticated animals, significantly caused by the genetic uniformity that the chain depends upon. Confining animals to crowded conditions creates a perfect incubator for those diseases. The avian flu and SARS viruses were traced to factory farms. Deadly viruses are one byproduct of industrial operations. The chain's operations also generate greenhouse gases. As the industry expands operations, vast forest lands are removed to plant soy, sugarcane, and palm oil for use in processed foods. Fossil fuels are used to manufacture fertilizers and pesticides for agriculture. The industry transports crops from one continent to feed animals confined on another continent, which are then processed for market thousands of miles in another direction. Processed and packaged foods that line grocery store shelves and freezers sections travel long distances and waste fuel and water in their production. The industrial food chain must be understood as an economic system connected within the financial and political system, including regulators, bankers, speculators, and governments. From their position, the chain controls the policy environment for our food and the global food economy. Reviewing statistics about the industry's wasteful operations and environmental impacts, one might conclude that the system is broken. It is a mistake to draw that conclusion. The industry is designed to produce and sell products and expand its customer base. The corporations who dominate the industry trade on the stock market, and investors regard this industry as an opportunity. With the support of federal policy, public funding, and trade deals, the chain continues to expand its reach. A handful of transnational corporations produce the chain's products, including crops, fertilizers and pesticides, seeds, processed foods, food additives, and the pharmaceuticals injected into animals confined in factories for meat production. Taken together, the statistics are revealing. By design and practice, the industry fails to deliver. Conversely, the food web is designed to work in partnership with nature. Consequently, they must protect local ecosystems in order to be successful. The web of small-scale producers protects and generates a wealth of diverse sources of food. They have bred and donated 2.1 million plant varieties. Together, they protect and interbreed 50 to 60,000 crops from wild plants. They cultivate seeds. 80 to 90% of their seeds are not sourced through commercial markets. They have domesticated at least 34 livestock species and nurtured and bred 8,774 rare breeds of these species, developed 117 fermentation strategies that secure vitamins and minerals, practice artisanal, sustainable fishing techniques to protect freshwater and marine species. With proven practices, they care for the health of their habitats, protect wild pollinators. They use local ecological knowledge to fertilize soils and manage pests, safeguard the cultures and practices that nurture soil health. And they do this by creating tree windbreaks. They have nitrogen-fixing, deep-rooted plants and mixed crop livestock systems. They use holistic methods for capturing rainwater, and they protect forest habitats. The ETC Group report, Who Will Feed Us?, created a set of recommendations based on the conclusions drawn from researching and comparing the two food systems. Here is what they recommend. Empower small-scale agroecological communities operating in the food web. By ensuring agrarian reform, including the right to territories, that is, land, water, forest, fishing, foraging, and hunting. restoring the right to freely save, plant, exchange, sell, and breed seeds and livestock. Remove regulations blocking local markets and diversity. Reorient research and development to respond to peasant directions. Institute fair trade determined by peasant directions. And establish fair wages and working conditions for agricultural workers. The report also identified the benefits of implementing these recommendations. With the right policies, land and rights, peasant-led agroecological strategies could double or triple rural employment, reduce pressure for urban migration, improve nutritional availability, and eliminate hunger while slashing greenhouse gases by 90%. Before we move on, let's look at the recommendations again. Every one of them represents a barrier that currently prevents local food systems from thriving. A powerful combination of laws, regulations, and trade practices have marginalized small-scale producers and created advantageous conditions for the industry. These recommendations recognize the web of small-scale producers as the leaders we need to meet the demands of food, water, and climate. Right now, the Farm Bill maintains a publicly funded industrial food economy, which consolidates power and wealth in the hands of a handful of transnational corporations whose costly operations fail to deliver food and water security to our communities. The only conclusion we can draw is this: we have a publicly funded food economy, just not the one we need to live sustainably. We are at a crossroads. The climate crisis is our opportunity to set a new course together with a strategic leadership response. That strategy must provide the tools we need as communities to operate in the role that only we can do. We are the custodians of the water we drink, the soil beneath our feet, and the air we breathe. We need an economy designed to support our role. To be successful, we need to create a robust, locally adapted food economy designed for living sustainably. The Headwaters Community Food and Water Bill creates the new economy we need to meet the demands of food, water, and climate. From source to table, the locally adapted food web economy will connect all communities to a common purpose, nurturing trust and the vital connections between urban and rural communities we need in order to care for our common home together. Modeled after the proven leadership of Indigenous communities who partner with nature to operate food systems designed to care for ecosystems. The Headwaters Bill creates a food web economy to generate and maintain our capacity to source, preserve, deliver, and store food within our communities. The regenerative food web system is an effective tool for managing energy, the energy created in partnership with nature. An effective design and operating system is crucial. This map reveals the component parts of the food web economy. It includes all landscapes and all potential sources of food that need to be cared for and managed. This operation is designed to eliminate waste and ensure that food is accessible to every community member every day. Key to the food web operations is an effective communication system between members to track and deliver food on the journey from source to table. By design and practice, the local food web can generate abundant sources of food that are preserved, delivered, and stored to eliminate waste and serve community needs. To generate capacity, the food web operates a set of complementary community care programs that employ people in a number of professions, including landscape restoration, agroecological farming, community kitchens, neighborhood commons, a delivery system and pollinator landscape, as well as edible landscape care, botanists, urban and rural learning centers, research, and emergency prep and recovery. By locating food at the center of our communities, we will need a cohort of farmers and community cooks. A local food economy must be designed to eliminate the problems created by the industrial food system. With strategic investments and effective operations, we can generate abundant sources of food with designated destinations. One destination is the neighborhood commons. The commons is like a public library for food, a resource available to every community member, a public good. Every neighborhood commons will feature a supply of foods, prepared, fresh, and preserved. They may vary in size and other offerings. Depending on the needs of the community and the availability of land, some commons might also feature additional services like greenhouses, root cellars, community kitchens, and garden for learning. The local food movement has been growing for a number of years, with a variety of programs, businesses, farms, and cooperatives. This dynamic has been driven by visionary leaders who've dedicated their time and energy without the benefit of public policy and public investments that drives the industry. The Headwaters Bill provides resources for these local initiatives to participate and benefit in the food web. To be successful, we need habitats restored to health and designed to support native species while producing sources of food. Consequently, the bill provides resources for conventional farmers to discontinue operating in the industrial system and restore land to participate in growing food as members of the new economy. Working in partnership with nature, the members of the food web will generate vital knowledge and practices that will be shared and documented. The healthy soil generated by that partnership provides an environment for absorbing water, sequestering carbon, and nourishing life. Of all the defining features of this economy, perhaps the one that distinguishes it most from the industrial system is this: the regenerative food web is designed and operates to deliver health and well-being to all communities, no exceptions. The food web is community-based, decentralized, and coordinated to ensure that each community is organized to care for and benefit from caring for the health of their ecosystems. It's time for an economy designed to be resilient, replacing created scarcity with the conditions we need for every community to thrive. perhaps most importantly, the Headwaters Community Food and Water Bill takes our circumstances seriously. It creates the inclusive economy we need to face the climate challenge together and the tools we need to shape it. So now, what are our next steps? It is clear that we face significant challenges that require visionary leadership and strategic actions. We can take heart from this. We know what we need to do. That work has already begun both here in Minnesota and across the globe. Leaders are promoting local food systems. And because to be successful, we need to empower local communities to nurture the health of ecosystems and source the food we need, we have a powerful incentive to work together as neighbors connected by common purpose. The Headwaters Bill creates a just food economy designed to cultivate those connections. And there is good news to report. MN 350 Action is excited to announce that the Minnesota House Select Committee on Racial Justice report to the legislature recommends supporting the Economic Resiliency Program created by the Headwaters Community Food and Water Bill. This past year has revealed with breathtaking clarity the enduring harms of systemic racism and the need to map a path forward defined by racial, economic, and environmental justice. With this recommendation, our elected leaders are providing the resources to create that path forward. Never has it been more important to understand the natural world and how we can help it together. With this statement, David Attenborough reminded us of our role together as the custodians of our common home and the urgency of this moment. MN 350 Action welcomes you to our campaign to pass the Headwaters Bill. Thank you for your attention. Please let me know if you have questions. Hello. Can everyone hear me? Hard to know.
Yes.
Is that the tech support saying yes? Okay. There she is. Hi, Sarah.
I'm here.
All right.
You ready to start some questions?
I am.
We got a couple of questions in the chat as we went along, and I'm going to start with a housekeeping type of question. The slides are filled with amazing data and information. Can you share these with us so we can study them more?
Yes, absolutely. This presentation is recorded both as the Tegeder talk and also with my tech support. We'll have it available on the Just Food and Water website. So it's made for sharing. And if you go on the Just Food and Water website, there's lots of other resources. So if you're one of those people that just loves to delve into things, we have links to organizations that have been working with communities around the globe for many years. We have, there's posters, there are articles, there's a whole FAQ about what this bill does. There's many different ways that you can learn more. Is that helpful?
That is helpful. And I did just drop in the chat the link to the Just Food and Water website. It's justfoodandwater.org/headwaters-bill. But if you Google Just Food and Water, you should be able to find it. But I put that link in the chat for people so they can go and find. And I know there's a lot of, like all of the posters are available. And then as Marita said, when the presentation gets up, that's the website it will be on as well.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple of questions here. This is one that we get pretty frequently. So how does a web of small producers feed cities in a place with limited growing seasons, such as Minnesota? I know you mentioned some of the defining features of the peasant food web economy or regenerative food economy would be like greenhouses, conservatories, root cellars, stuff like that. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you expect to feed everybody with this?
Well, first I'm going to tell you that this isn't a new idea. What I'm suggesting is something that's really been around for a long time. In fact, as you saw in our presentation, most of the world's food is actually produced locally by small scale producers, and those foods feed people within generally 100 miles of where they're sourced. And that includes people who are largely fishing communities. It includes people who live in forest communities, in many different types of landscapes. So this is already happening. However, Minnesota specifically has its own story, and it's really kind of fascinating. If you are familiar with the North Shore, there's a little town called Finland, which is up Highway 1. And several years ago, actually almost 3 decades ago now, there was a small group of people that decided this was an important place to live, and they moved there and they started doing farming. But at the same time, they also researched what that community had done over many decades. And what they discovered was that there's a story of that whole area, including the Duluth area, that goes back to the time when my grandparents were kids, which is late 1800s. And as it happened, unfortunately, the logging industry had removed a lot of the old growth pine in that area. And as a result, the land became available and the population was starting to grow because of other industries moving into the area. And there were leaders in Duluth area specifically who said, we need to be able to feed the people that are here. It's twice the population that it is now. So it was about 150,000 people. And they actually set up a system for developing farms in the area, some very small scale farms, 5 to 10 acres, and managed not only to feed that population, but also produce enough to be able to share those foods regionally. So they were both producing as well as preserving foods and then sharing them within the region. So into Wisconsin, even as far as Western Minnesota. And this was back at a time when there really weren't other sources of food that were being delivered from long distances. So in a way, they had to do this, but they also put the energy and time into figuring out how would they develop a system that made it possible. And they did. So I grew up in the Duluth area, and I know it has a reputation for being much colder than the Twin Cities. So you'll understand that if they managed to do it back then, certainly we can do it now. And it really is a case of having the supports in place. You saw the recommendations in the slideshow. Those recommendations for helping local food production are recommendations that would help our area as well as other locations around the world. They apply to all of us.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a great answer. And I did go and I got the link to the Finland Food Chain website. So for people who want to go read more about like a real life example of what this would look like and how it would work, the Finland Food Chain, finlandfoodchain.org. I dropped that link in the chat. You can go check it out and learn a little bit more about what a regional food system would look like in the state of Minnesota. So our next question is, we're going to talk about the industrial food system a little bit and pricing. Can you speak to food subsidies that support the industrial food chain and also how this affects local small growers and how they price their goods? Organic food prices are often beyond what all can afford. So how would the Headwaters bill address that?
Well, you're right. The industry does receive subsidies, and we mostly hear about subsidies for crops, for instance. So if you're growing corn in western Minnesota, in the Red River Valley or south of there in the Chippewa River Valley, you're going to get a subsidy to grow that corn. If you're a local food producer growing organic food, you do not get any kind of subsidy. In fact, if you're in that population of farmers, what you're likely to get is an opportunity to apply for a competitive grant if you're looking for extra resources to be able to do your job better, to be able to develop on your farm system or perhaps market more easily. But those competitive granting systems really make it difficult for real stability as a producer for a couple of reasons. One is you're always competing with somebody else. So you're competing with your neighbor for that money. If you grow corn, that's an automatic subsidy. So it's a very different system. There are also subsidies given in the industry for things like research and product production, subsidies for fuel. So for instance, if you're a fisherman working in that industry and you're part of the industrial model, you get a subsidy for your fuel. And it's one of the reasons actually why our fishing stocks in oceans and in lakes have been reduced by huge percentages because we're overfishing. The subsidies that go for research are going to either industry leaders or in some cases to universities. And what, as you saw in the recommendations, what the ETC group report recommends is that research money really should be going to small scale producers who have proven practices for generating food in a way that is sustainable. And the other reason that they recommend it is because very often these small scale producers who have long histories of producing in a particular region are very good at figuring out how to generate more diversity, use the diversity in that landscape to be able to produce more food. They also have other practices that they have continued to use over long periods of time that are proven to work. And so the recommendations suggest that these people really know how to do research well, and we should trust them, and we should give them the resources to do it. Right now, they don't get those resources. So that might answer your question partially. I don't know if you'd like more than that.
Well, we can go on. We have another question that kind of related, talking about subsidies that support the industrial food, the food chain. We have a question about the Farm Bill. Colin Peterson, former chair of the U.S. House Agricultural Committee, likes to say that if we mess with the Farm Bill, then we will hurt American farmers who are in the industrial food system. Does the Headwaters bill help conventional farmers so they can transition to the sustainable regenerative system that you describe? And if so, how?
So in the list of things that this bill would offer. One of them is a transition subsidy. So that, for instance, I met a farmer, um, almost a year ago now, because it was before the pandemic, who gave a presentation about deciding that he and his family would transition their farm to regenerative practices and also begin to have livestock in their landscape. And there really wasn't, apart from a subsidy to help with soil health, which is now becoming really a much bigger part of what we're doing to help farmers, there wasn't any other resource for them. And one of the things he said was, this is really hard. Our family decided to do this transition, but we need support, because moving from having relied on one approach to deciding we're going to move into a completely different approach, it messes up their finances. So because I know that we're going to need to have our landscapes healthy, we included in this bill a subsidy for conventional farmers to move out of that system, begin to generate healthy soil, so stop putting the chemicals into their land, plant the cover crops to begin that process of changing the microbial soil health, and then start planting the kind of foods that we would actually eat. We've been in this has been a problem for a number of years, and I know that our audience here is likely to be familiar with this story because a lot of us are older. We've watched this transpire over decades. So, we pay farmers to grow corn. We pay them to grow soybeans. We pay them to grow on a huge scale. And this has been happening for a long time. The real question is, are we going to break the cycle so that we can actually have the food that we need and stop destroying their ecosystems that are also essential for all of us? And as long as we pay farmers to grow corn, we're going to be in the wrong place. So this is the time to be changing that. Well, 40 years ago, 50 years ago was really the time, but we don't have a minute to waste. So we do want people who own land, who are currently farming in that industrial system, we want to invite them to leave that system and become part of this system so that both they can benefit and the land that they're stewarding can be transformed. And then they'll be part of something that is promising for all of our communities. So I understand Colin Peterson's argument. He's right. This is the system we have, and they rely on those payments. We know farmers don't make any money if they don't get a subsidy. The ones that are growing corn, it's crucial to them. We got to stop paying them to do the thing that's not good for them or for us. So that's what this is about.
Thank you. We're going to build on that a little bit, thinking about, help for transitioning farmers. What else is in the bill? So we have a couple of different versions of this question. Can you be more specific about what is in it? What does the bill contain? What proposals are in it? Is solar and wind power a part of this initiative? Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the specifics in the bill?
So the way the bill is worded, it says that we will supply all financial and technical resources to create a regenerative food web economy that is actually designed to meet the demands of food, water, and climate. So this is about designing a system that allows us to have in place resources to build our capacity to feed ourselves. So for instance, right now, if you're a CSA farmer, what you do is you create your own market and you find the people that are going to buy into that. What this bill would do was allow you to transfer from that model to become part of the food web economy and receive resources so that instead of having to deliver your food to individuals, the food that you generate could end up right in a neighborhood at a neighborhood commons. And a neighborhood commons is one of the things that would be included as a resource in this bill. So for instance, if you live in Longfellow neighborhood in Minneapolis, or you live in Frogtown in St. Paul, or in my neighborhood in Denoyer Park, we would have some kind of a commons there where food supplies would have been delivered from local food sources, either from an urban farm or from connected rural farms. And it might have been a former CSA or a cooperative like the Share Ground Farmers Cooperative, which has a dozen different farmers that work together. And these locations right in our neighborhoods then become the place that you would go to get foods that are fresh, foods that might be cooked or preserved. They might also have other resources at that place. If it's a larger landscape, you might have a conservatory there where plants are being grown year round, or a greenhouse. You might also have land where you've got a garden there as well, so it becomes a learning space as well as a place to grow food. What this bill does is it envisions really making sure that our landscapes where food is grown are being cared for, and that we're generating as much food as we possibly can in our local landscapes. So the resources are there to make sure that happens. We even have a program which I call edible landscapes. So as an example, when I was a kid, I grew up in Duluth, and at our home, we had 3 apple trees. They were enormous. We had huge harvests of apples, and even with 7 of us all collecting them, putting them in boxes, peeling them, freezing them, making applesauce, making apple butter, we still had tons of apples left to share. And with this food web economy, an edible landscape program would allow people who have fruit trees in their yards, even in urban areas or even on farms where they often don't have enough people to manage all that, they would be able to register their trees and participate in benefiting from having a botanist keep track of that tree, having people come and harvest if they need help with it, having a way to share their excess with a place where that fruit could also be preserved for another time of year when it's not going to be fresh. So what we're trying to do with this is really create a system that eliminates waste, builds our capacity in every way to feed ourselves, and make sure that that food is also preserved for times when we're not able to grow, and that we have it stored effectively and delivered effectively. That's kind of a long answer. I don't know if that's what you were looking for.
It's a good answer. And it's a long answer, I think, because the food economy is huge. I mean, it's an overarching thing. At MN 350, we say that 26% of greenhouse gas emissions in Minnesota are generated by the industrial food economy, which is on par with with electric and transportation. And so if you're willing to consider solar panels or electric vehicles, you should be willing to look at the food on your plate, because it's a huge system. And so the answer is not simple. What's all in this bill? Lots of stuff, because it's a big problem we need to address. I did drop in the chat a link to the 2021 version of the bill. So if people want to read it for themselves, all the legalese, you might notice that it's only 3 pages long.
Mm-hmm.
So even though it contains multitudes, it is written, Marita, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more like a framework that would provide different regions with the support they need to do what's best for them in terms of food. So it's written loosely with that in mind. Is that a fair statement?
It is, because really what we're providing is infrastructure to make sure that every community can participate in sourcing, delivering, preserving, cooking, farming, all of the different component parts. So depending on what is available in your particular county, city, region, there's a lot of room for being able to develop that web and develop the relationships between the different communities. In fact, there are resources too to make sure that, say for instance, you do live in an urban area, you're a member, you live in the Twin Cities. It's pretty clear we're not going to be able to grow in our neighborhoods all the food that we need because we simply don't have the land. But there are resources in the bill for creating relationships between urban and rural landscapes. So again, making that connection between Hennepin County and Ramsey County, as well as the next county out, Washington County or Dakota County, and maybe the next one even further out that has more land for growing. So the idea is that instead of us being dependent on an industrial system that we know simply isn't going to be, it's going to collapse within the next few decades because of its use of water, if nothing else. We build a system where we're really making sure that whatever we can possibly grow and do it well, we grow that and we make sure it has a destination. So we make those connections between urban and rural communities. And this also might mean that, I think it definitely means that we have young people really connected more and more to their food as they're learning more about it, as they're going to these neighborhood commons and learning about the farms that produce the food that comes there. There'll be cooks in those community kitchens that people can learn from. It really is about changing the way where food is in our lives and how important it is. For a long time, we've been told, well, we need more engineers, we need more computer scientists. And I think we're at a point now where we really need to talk about, we need more people who understand how to grow food, how to take care of the land, how to cook food and preserve it, and how to make sure that in that food web economy, we have the kind of communication it's going to take to make sure that everything is moving effectively where it needs to go. I had a conversation one day with Reese Williams, who actually works at the Good Acre now, but he has been in a food system economy for all of his life. So he's been a farmer. He's been in food production in one way or another. So he understands the system. And at the Good Acre, they decided to do a research project about tomatoes. And they had this enormous tent that had tomatoes in it, all these different kinds. And so I said, well, what are you going to do with all these tomatoes? Because, even in our neighborhoods, a lot of times people are trying to give away their extras from their gardens. They said, oh, they all have a destination. They're all going to go to the Lake Winds Co-op where they're going to preserve them. And then they're going to become part of chili that's going to get frozen. And when people need that frozen chili, it's going to be available. So everything was set up. And that's an example of how this food web economy would work. Whatever food's being produced, it's got to have a destination. It's got to have a plan for making sure it gets where it needs to go so it's not wasted and so that we can count on it for when we need it. That's the idea.
Thank you for that. I just dropped another link in the chat. We do have a short video that people can watch if they want to see a little bit more. It's about a 4 minutes long, I think. A little intro video to the bill so people can learn a little more about it. Like I said, it's a big bill, lots to talk about. I really appreciate they mentioned those urban-rural connections, because that's going to be a big part of that, of this. Since we know that cities probably cannot provide their own food, we're going to have to really strengthen those connections. I'm going to jump just a little bit, we've had quite a few questions about sort of the nuts and bolts of the legislative process. So first question, is this a state or a federal initiative?
It is a state bill, but I will say that initially I wrote a bill that was intended to be an alternative to the Farm Bill with much the same design in mind. Because really the issue is, how is your system designed? What are the practices? And what are its intentions? And the intention of this bill is to have a system that delivers health and well-being to our communities while also taking care of the ecosystems. That's the key. So, as you know, things have been challenging at the federal level for quite a long time. And it's going to be really important for us to actually have a federal system that works. But it was important right now to start talking in our state, in our communities, about what do we really need. So I decided, let's write something that's for this state. And initially, Fu Lee was the person who took it on. He's a representative in North Minneapolis. And now his colleague, Goli Her, who represents the area of St. Paul where I live, is going to take it on this year. And they're part of an environmental caucus of legislators. They really have a commitment to having a just food economy for all of our communities. So the bill doesn't have a number yet this year. Somebody asked about the process. And the reason for that is because right now the revisor's office is overwhelmed. So apparently working remotely has made it much more difficult for the folks in that office to keep up with all the demand. So when we have a bill number, we'll let people know.
Thank you for that. So we do have a sponsor. That was another question. So Goli Her has agreed to introduce the bill. And we are going to be shouting it from the rooftops as soon as we get that bill number. I will drop in, if you want to know when it gets dropped and when we have a bill number and what you can do next, I'll drop this in the chat. We have a link for MN350's pledge of support for the Headwaters bill. So I just dropped that in the chat. If you click there, you sign the pledge, and then you'll get notifications whenever we have news to share about the bill. So that is one way to stay involved. Another question, legislative-wise, sort of. I did not notice a budget in the bill. Is there an estimated cost?
Well, right now, there isn't a number, a fiscal note attached to the bill. That's not my area of expertise. And I was told that we could get advice on that. And I trust that because I know that there are people who are much more adept at knowing what would it cost, for instance, to set up learning centers. For instance, in Northfield, some of you may have heard of the Main Street Project. It now goes by a different name. It's called Sharing Our Roots. But for the last 5-6 years, they have been training farmers in a system for regenerative farming, which includes having animals on the land, and the landscapes are specifically designed for them to be healthy. And it produces a great deal of vegetables and nuts and fruits, as well as the poultry that's part of that system. They would be able to tell us, here's what it would cost to train farmers, because they know. The Finland food chain will be another resource for a fiscal note, because they've actually got a study for a 17 county region that includes their area, but counties in northeastern Minnesota and northwestern Wisconsin, that helps inform what would it cost if we actually had a healthy local food system for this region. And so they'll be another resource for telling us, what are we going to need to make this happen? I think that as community members, we're going to have to be very vocal, not only at the
level of our counties and states about this issue, but also with our federal leaders in saying, we need the resources to be able to do this. So it's quite possible Minnesota doesn't have enough money to be able to fund this on its own. But we all know it's true that our roads and bridges are not built with strictly with state money either. Federal dollars help with that. So this is the opportunity to tell our leaders, we want to live sustainably here. We want a system that works. We want one that we know will be available in years to come as Sarah's young children grow up. She has a 3 and a 5-year-old. As our grandchildren grow up. And we need to communicate that to the federal leaders as well, where really the money is available. It's just being sent in the wrong direction. So I guess I didn't entirely answer your question. We don't have a number yet, but we will.
And we don't have a budget yet, but we will.
That's right.
Okay, I think that takes care of sort of the nuts and bolts legislative questions. Although if I missed any, shoot them at me again in the chat, and I'll try to catch them. We got a lot of good questions tonight, and if I'm right, about 15 minutes left. So, a question about facts and figures. The 30% of the population that is fed by industrial agriculture, is that a worldwide figure? And if so, are you including industrial ag producers worldwide?
Yes. So that number comes from the ETC group report, which I mentioned in the presentation. And what they did is, over a number of years and with resources from many different articles and leaders and groups, they created a report that looks at both of these systems in depth. And then in doing so, they actually said, make sure people know about this. Just get it out there. We want people to understand this is what we're doing. This is what's happening in the world. So, the industry dominates here in the United States, very much so. I think it's one of the reasons why we don't realize that in many parts of the world, especially in the global south, the food is still being produced mostly by people of color, small scale, indigenous people who've lived in these landscapes for, in some cases, thousands of years. They're feeding themselves, and they are also producing food that is marketed within their regions. The industry does actually decide the policy for the world, largely because there is a connection between what happens in the United States and the USDA writing that farm bill, and specifically developed nations where they agree on what policies they want, except the occasional disagreements, such as over GMO. So for instance, Europe has said, no, we don't want GMO seeds here. They looked at the research and they decided that having seeds that would contaminate the diversity of seeds that are in their landscapes is not a good idea. And so they rejected it. But otherwise, there's a lot of synergy between national governments around the world that are looking for the kinds of money and resources that these big corporations can bring into their countries, and what happens right here in the United States with the Farm Bill.
So another related question. I'm not surprised. We do get a lot of questions about funding, which makes sense. What about asking for 5% of the $46 billion in the Farm Bill as a start? I thought maybe you might want to talk about, I know that you had mentioned to me that there was this pot of money from a different source that might be available. Maybe you could give us some idea of how that would work and where that money might come from.
Well, the questions about money are really important because money is what's driving all of this. Mm-hmm. And So some of you may read more broadly on some of these issues, and you may have noticed that there was an article that revealed that there is a fund that was set up back in the 30s to try and help maintain farms back then, when, of course, there was a crisis with the Depression. And that fund apparently still exists. It's about $30 billion, and it was being used during the last administration to grant money to conventional farmers because of the issues during the pandemic. So now there's a question of, well, that's money that doesn't go through a legislative process. So could we use that money to jumpstart these local food systems? And we're not the only place in the United States where local food systems are really generating a lot of interest. There's more momentum. In fact, the pandemic really spiked interest in local food systems. People got worried about where their food was coming from in the last several months. So I'm actually hopeful that there's a way that we can tap into that fund that was set up way back in the 30s. We need to get to the right people to make that happen. But, somebody asked, well, what about getting just a percentage of the Farm Bill money? I don't know. We'll take whatever they'll give us. But I will say this, and I say this to our team at MN 350 often, we do, as communities, we need to think the way corporations do. When they go to Congress to get money for their businesses, and they are subsidized heavily, they don't ask for a competitive grant. They ask for billions and they get it. Our communities need to have healthy food. We need to have clean water. In Minnesota, something like 40% of our water is contaminated. Minnesota. This is, this is a fight we need to be part of. So we should expect that public investments actually are given for things that are going to deliver health and well-being, not contaminate the ecosystems that we rely on to sustain us. Somebody has, that's the one. That's the article from Politico.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was searching through my email looking for it because I knew you sent it to me. So for everybody who's wondering about where the money might come from, this is one possibility. I linked the article, the Politico article, here in the chat. So you can take a look at that.
Sarah, I was thinking we should reinforce what I mentioned in the presentation about the House Select Committee on Racial Justice.
Yes.
Because this is such important news. It's really so important that this bill has been recognized by a committee that was formed in the months prior to the end of 2020 in response to this really challenging year and the enduring issues with racism. And the bill was selected as one that's recommended now as a means to help us change our economic and ecological landscape defined by racial justice. So we're very encouraged by that. And Goli Her actually sat on that committee. So I'm fairly certain that between her and Fu Lee and some of the others that are leaders from that caucus, that's the reason why it's included. And Sarah has just dropped in the chat the link to the report. So
I'm furiously searching for all the links as we go here. I know we have all this information. So, all right. So we just have a couple minutes left. And I have a question about words of wisdom. And I thought this might be a good one to end with here. So we're going to put you on the spot. It says, I am a dietetics student at Viterbo University. With the guidance of my professor, we are spearheading a new course about food ethics. Could you share some words of wisdom for students who feel disheartened at the grave implications of the industrial food system and the challenges at transforming it?
Hmm. You know, the last few years, I have spent my time really reaching out to communities to try and talk about this bill and this issue. And I will tell you that in that journey, I have met some extraordinary people. And many of the leaders for this kind of work actually live at the margins of our society. They're the people that have not had the opportunities, have been, in many cases, deliberately left out of opportunities. And they're looking for ways to heal in their communities. And for them, food is one of those ways to heal. In those spaces, I've met some incredibly powerful and gracious people. And they're working against all the odds to make that happen. So you should take heart from that, because there are just really some amazing people out there. And I think the main thing is that we need to decide that we're together on this. That's how you win. If this is our commitment to a healthy community and healthy ecosystems, and this is the path to get there through the Headwaters Bill and the vision that it has, then the more we can work together and care about this together, the more powerful we can be. So feel confident that this can work if we can join forces. And MN 350 Action took this on so that we can have an organization that really is pushing for this as a climate solution. So you can always come and volunteer your energy and your passion to make that happen.
All right. I am going to take the opportunity to drop one more link in the chat. The last one I put in there was for podcasts, a podcast series that MN 350 is producing. Something that gives me hope, and something that Marita mentioned, is there are leaders out there. There's already leaders out there doing this. They are creating the food system we say we want, and they're doing it without the support of the federal government. So we've created this podcast where we're actually interviewing these leaders to have them tell their story about how they're going about doing it and how they see it expanding so that it really can feed all of us while taking care of the earth, the home that we share. So I'd really encourage people to check out some of those podcasts, because nothing gives me hope like listening to people who know what they're doing say they have it under control. So that's the last one I dropped. And then one more time, I'm going to drop a link in here for anyone who wants to sign the pledge of support for the Headwaters Bill. This is how we keep in touch with people when there's actions you can take specifically related to it. So if this sounds like something you want to support and you're like, great, what do I do next? I'm going to drop this link for you to sign the pledge, and that's how you can stay involved.
And just so you know, if you go on the Just Food and Water website, there are links to those things as well. So if you lose track of this, okay? It looks like Dave's ready to send us off for the rest of the evening.
I am.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very well done. Oh my goodness, what a presentation. This is just fascinating. And let me just say, first and foremost, is that there is so much out there that Sarah has been putting on Chatline that we'll be sending out an email soon also with all of these links. So if you haven't figured out how to save all of this and get all the connections, which are lined up across all of my Google sites, we will get those out to you. So don't panic about that. That's an important thing because of so much information. So thank you, Marita, for your wonderful presentation, and Sarah for your assistance. This was great. The Tegeder Talks hope you have been inspired to learn more about food and water security. Furthermore, we hope you will use some vital adult conversation to contact public officials and ask them to support the Headwaters Community Food and Water Bill. So thank you all for attending and have a good night.